Do you think the worst of the state government fraud cases have been uncovered, or do you have reason to believe there is more to come?
Oh, I think there's more. And look, we've got organized crime ring in Minnesota. I think it's been going on for years.
From Feeding Our Future to autism programs to housing stabilization, Minnesota taxpayers are victims of more than $1 billion of fraud. Do you think there was not enough skepticism for too long in state agencies that were overseeing these programs?
I think it's an unfortunate situation, but yeah, I think you need to be more skeptical now in this world. I think the COVID pandemic and the releasing of some of the rules, the relaxing of the rules, fostered this.
On Feeding Our Future, some of it in retrospect seems so obvious. Thousands of children supposedly being fed at these sites that were, it just physically wasn't even possible. Was that a big miss by members of your administration who were supposed to be overseeing?
I think in retrospect now, if you have the resources, and I think we do have more of those now, yes, it makes sense to just go out there and see if someone's doing this. Go out there and knock on the door.
So we have got to talk about what is going on in Minnesota with Tim Walz. And I think that we can all breathe a huge sigh of relief that this man never ended up anywhere near the White House, because as we know, we would have never found out about any of this had Kamala Harris and Tim Walz won the election a year ago. Yeah, we dodged a bullet, to say the least. In fact, I think we probably dodged a nuclear bomb with these two. But I don't know about you guys. My social media feed is just flooded with fraud cases coming out of Minnesota. And this thing with the Somali community and the Feeding Our Future organization that was supposed to be feeding hungry children, that's just probably one of the biggest cases. But there's a lot going on in this state. And it goes without saying, like I said, so glad that this man did not end up in the White House. He pretends to be a knucklehead. I think he is a knucklehead. There's no pretending there. But there's no way that he can claim to not have known that this was going on, because it's one thing for fraud to be happening in your state. Every state has fraud going on. I'm not going to deny that. Red state, blue state, doesn't matter. There are always shady things going on. But to this level, with this many organizations and this many people involved and this much of the taxpayer money being stolen, just ripped out right from under people's noses, you have to be insulting people's intelligence to think that you can just sweep this away and say, I didn't know. We know better now. We'll learn better for next time, because it's just not going to fly. So we're going to look at what was happening with this Feeding Our Future organization. And obviously this ties in a few different areas about all of the investigations of fraud into all of these systems that is going on right now, that is clearly very much needed, but also this issue of immigration and cracking down on bringing people, particularly from third world countries, that do not want to assimilate to our culture. In fact, they just want to come here and abuse our systems for their own gain. And we foot the bill for that. And why it is very much justified to just say, you know what, like, you guys were welcome to come here and take advantage of the American opportunity for a better life. But since you've proven that you don't really want to do that, it's okay if we say we gave you a chance, you abused that chance, and now we're just going to cut it off at the knees. Like, you guys are no longer welcome here, at least until we can clean up this mess and then reevaluate how we want to vet people from these particular areas in the future, because that is very much needed. Now, if you try to have that argument with an unhinged liberal, they will say that you are a racist and a bigot. Not because you're accusing people of committing actual crimes and raising legitimate concerns, but because if you criticize anybody that is darker than, shall we say, me, then you are just a racist and a bigot. And that is the only reason that you ever issue any criticism towards these people. But whatever. I don't care. Call me what you want. I don't want people coming here that are not going to assimilate to America's culture and our values and steal taxpayer dollars from us. But that's just me. Anyway, let's get into this. But before we get too much further, I'm Outspoken Samantha. I appreciate you so much for being here. Please hit the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for doing both of those things. I don't know exactly where to start with this, so we're just going to start here. In this article, it says, Hundreds of state workers at the Minnesota Department of Human Services publicly excoriated Governor Tim Walz for allowing a massive fraud scandal to unfold under his watch and retaliating against their whistleblowers. So people were telling Tim Walz what was going on, and instead of helping them out, he decided to target them and intimidate them into silence, but we will get further into that in a minute. Over $1 billion in taxpayers' money was fleeced by dozens of scammers in Minnesota's Feeding Our Future fraud scandal, the largest known COVID-19 fraud case in the country. Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. The Minnesota DHS Employees X account, which represents over 480 staffers, chided Saturday. Tim Walz systemically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation, the account charged. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can turn to. Well, I think we know that if your governor particularly is a Democrat, you cannot turn to them to talk about fraud because likely they are a part of it. But if you're not familiar with this Feeding Our Future case, the best explanation I can give is that Feeding Our Future was this kind of umbrella organization. It was at the top. It was led by a woman named Amy Bach, I believe her name was. And we had all of these little charities under this umbrella popping up all over the state of Minnesota, claiming to want to help them feed people, particularly during COVID, feed hungry children and whatnot. Because, you know, if you slap the label of it's for the children on an organization, no one is ever going to question it. So we had things like restaurants and grocery stores and whatnot saying that they were feeding X number of people every single day, invoicing this umbrella organization, and then they were submitting those invoices and those documents to the DHS office in Minnesota, saying this is how much we've done, please reimburse us. And then they were distributing that money to these smaller charities. Turns out all of them were just big fat liars. So we're going to look at a couple of these stories and just see how bad this was, because almost 80 people are being investigated and charged. And the amount of fraud that has happened just from the scheme alone is at about 250 million. So that's about how much has been taken from the American taxpayers in this state. And of course, Tim Walz is saying, I didn't know that this was going on. Yeah, you did, Timmy. Yeah, you did.
77th person is now charged in the $300 million Feeding Our Future meal fraud case. Usman Kamara runs a very popular grocery store in North Minneapolis on Broadway Avenue called Kay's Dollar Grocery and Deli, or Kay's African Market. That's where federal prosecutors say Kamara claimed to serve 300,000 meals to kids during the pandemic. The indictment says that never happened, and he stole $1 million meant to feed hungry kids. The feds plan to seize the building where the store is located because they say Kamara used fraud money to buy it from his landlord.
And here's another one.
In December of 2021, the FBI installed a surveillance camera overlooking this building just off Lake Street in Minneapolis. At the time, it was Safari Restaurant, which overall took in $12 million in federal child meal payments through Feeding Our Future. Safari's former co-owner, Salim Saeed, is on trial alongside Amy Bach, the Feeding Our Future executive director. Safari claimed to feed 4,000 to 6,000 kids a day. Its invoices and meal counts shown to the jury alongside the video. An FBI agent testifying that an average of 40 people came and went during the 6 weeks it was surveilled. The FBI set up a total of 12 cameras at sites claiming to serve extraordinary numbers of meals. Another was at a deli in St. Paul, also registered by defendant Salim Saeed, which claimed 1,800 meals per day. The video shown to the jury showed an average of 23 people a day coming and going.
Those are just a couple of the stories that are coming out of this situation, and there are tons more. And when Tampon Tim says that this is because of the loosening of COVID-era policies, well, it's because Not only did they set up all of these charities under Feeding Our Future and saying that they were feeding all these people, but the policies that would have allowed this means that there wasn't people going to these locations to monitor them, showing up in person and making sure that this stuff was actually happening, that the invoices were legit, that there were actual people coming in and eating these meals, and there was no oversight, basically. So that's what he's blaming. But this is, several years later, and a lot of this fraud has still been going on this year. So there's really no excuse to say 5 years later that they didn't have the capacity for oversight. And of course, all of us are wondering, where's this money going? Well, we are hearing that they are purchasing real estate. They're purchasing luxury vehicles. They're funding luxury lifestyles with this money. They're also sending it home to their families in Somalia. And we are finding out that a lot of this money is also going to terrorists in that country that hate America. So yeah, American taxpayer dollars are funding terrorists. In this post, it says Fox News' Will Kane exposes the Somali community, now over 76,000 in Minnesota, where more than 40% of households in Somalia rely on remittances from abroad, with an estimated 1.7 billion sent annually to the Somali diaspora. A Somali fraud ring was exposed in Minnesota this week that claimed to be serving thousands of meals a day to underprivileged individuals. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The fraud ring used fake meal accounts, doctored attendance records, and fabricated invoices, all while raking in quite a bit of money from the government. And by from the government, they mean from the taxpayers. And Tampon Tim is going to claim that he didn't know that this was going on, but now that they do, they'll correct the problem. We'll take care of it, guys. No problem. Had we known, this never would have happened. Yeah, no, there were a lot of whistleblowers that came forward and tried to bring this to the attention of the governor, and they were the ones that were retaliated against. Not the people committing fraud, but the people who tried to expose it. That sounds about right for Democrats.
Hundreds of government workers accused Minnesota Governor Tim Walz of retaliating against whistleblowers. More than 400 members accused Walz of retaliation, ignoring warnings of a fraud scheme and stealing taxpayer dollars to fund a Somali terror group. This all comes after prosecutors said more than $250 million in funds were stolen from federally funded child nutrition programs. When confronted with these allegations, Walz blamed President Trump for the backlash.
Of course he's blaming Trump. When are they not blaming Trump? They screw up. They allowed abuse of the system to happen. They hide the abuse from people. They retaliate against people from reporting it, yet it's always Trump's fault.
Dollars in taxpayer money from dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy.
In theory, I understand not wanting to demonize an entire population of people, but when there's enough of them committing fraud, it is okay to take a step back and say, you know what, we need to reevaluate why you guys are here, make sure that you've been vetted properly, maybe get you to go through our legal immigration process, and make sure that the people coming from your country actually want to contribute to society. What Trump is doing is the appropriate thing. It says Trump is terminating deportation protections for Somalis in Minnesota. It says President Trump announced Friday that he will end temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota over rampant fraud in the state, which he attributed to Somali gangs. Minnesota under Governor Walz is a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. Trump wrote on Truth Social, I am, as President of the United States, hereby terminating, effective immediately, the temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota, the president added. Somali gangs are terrorizing the people of that great state, and billions of dollars are missing. But if you ask Ilhan Omar what she thinks, obviously she's going to disagree, because I'm sure that this is going to put a dent in her fundraising efforts.
Somalis are not terrorizing this nation. We are helping it thrive. Somalis have always seen themselves as a fabric of this nation. So not only are we not going anywhere, we are not going to allow anybody to make us feel less Minnesotan or less American.
I didn't know that ripping the state off to the tune of over $1 billion made you a part of the fabric of the nation. I didn't know that that made you patriotic. I didn't know that that was a symbol or your way of showing your appreciation to the country. Ilhan Omar. Yeah, you can leave too, and nobody would miss you, because we already know that you absolutely hate this country. So that is where we are at. We are actually having to have a conversation with people that, where we have to inform them and maybe get them to think a little bit, in saying that maybe inviting a bunch of people here that have a completely different way of life and a much lower standard of living without vetting them and then giving them protected status and then pretending that they're not defrauding the system, maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe that's not like a left versus right thing. Maybe it's okay for us to come together and say we need to have a conversation about this, that if we want to preserve our way of life here, if we want to maintain the standard of living and the freedoms and the opportunities that people come here for, then we need to have a standard that people need to meet before they come here, saying that if you're not going to uphold this standard, if you're going to lower things, if you're going to make it worse for people, if you're going to steal from us, you're not welcome here. Like, that's not controversial. That's not bigoted. That's not racist. That's me saying, I love America. I love what America has to offer. I don't care what color you are. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what your values are. Well, I kind of do care what your values are. Like, if you can't adjust your values to meet what we provide in America and to contribute to that, then stay in the country where your values are aligned with what's going on there. Like, that's not controversial. I don't know, you guys. I don't know. All I can say is, so glad Tim Walz, again, did not end up in the White House. And we are going to be talking more about the fraud going on in Minnesota, because there's a lot of it. It is the fraud hub. So that is where we are at today. I would love to hear all of your thoughts in the comments below. Please be sure to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel. As you guys know, we always end with Charlie Kirk. So keep it real, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
View the world differently than we do. You see, they say that America is for everybody and that anybody should be able to come, and that if it decreases or diminishes our standard of living, so be it, because the world is one big project and borders are kind of an antiquated idea and it's a colonialist experiment. So why shouldn't someone from Honduras just be able to come on up? Now, we believe that if you do not have borders, you don't have a nation. And the government is constituted to first serve its citizens, that we have a big heart, but you must first deliver for your citizens before you open your door. And that is the way families work, that's the way homes work, and that's the way a nation should work. Liberals would say, but what's the big deal? Why can't we just bring in another 100 million people? We're a big country, we can facilitate it. We would say, you'll lose your culture, you will lose your history, you will become something completely different, and if you import the third world, you will become the third world. And so why are they doing it? It's hard to pinpoint, George, but at the fundamental core, there is definitely this bleeding heart syndrome where they think America is the best example I could give is they think America is open for looting the way that Louis Vuitton was open for looting during the George Floyd riots. It's open season, take whatever you want.